I understand you're sharing time with Deputy McGrath.
2.5 minutes each. Um, like, I'd like to welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate tonight, and I think it's actually an important debate because it does highlight again, once again, this government how is exposed and how this government defers to the banks continuously. And I think one of the hallmarks of this government in its lifetime has been how the government has kowtowed to the banks and let the banks call the shots in relation to economic policy and in relation to policy around the banks and around what they're doing to our society. The one thing that should be clear to everybody in this society at this stage is that the banks don't work for the good of the people. The banks don't work for the good of their customers. They don't work for the good of citizens. The banks work to look after the banks, and that's their only reason for being. We saw it all through the build-up to the financial crash, up to the introduction of the bailout in 2010, that the banks just continued to fuel the market, fuel the bubble, keep it going, and drive it faster and faster by pumping money into the system, fueling the house price increases and fueling the debt burden on everybody across society. And since the crash, we've seen then that the government just plays to the bank's tune. The government is very wary of calling the banks in. I remember here in this House the government had to be cajoled and pushed into actually meeting with the banks to discuss issues around the increases in interest rates that the banks have been forcing on customers right across the country. And this leads to a situation now today, as has been pointed out in the motion, where over 300,000 families are on variable rate mortgages with interest rates of up to 4.5%. But when you consider that the banks are borrowing money at between 1.1 and 1.5% themselves. So there's huge profiteering taking place on the backs of very vulnerable people who are struggling to meet their mortgage payments and struggling through this recession. And what are they doing? Only fueling the recovery that the banks are getting. And much has been made over the last couple of months about the banks returning to profitability. But now we see, and it's exposed here tonight, how they've returned to that profitability by screwing people on variable rate mortgages. Those 300,000 people, if they're all paying up to €6,000 difference in what they would be paying if they had a reasonable rate on their mortgages, that would contribute over €1.8 billion in profit to the banks. So we see the facade that the banks have returned to profitability. We see the facade that it's done on the backs of very vulnerable people who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. And this government, to their eternal shame, has allowed that to happen and has laid down before the banks at every opportunity to allow them to continue to ride roughshod over the citizens of this society. And you need to do something or act on it.